Hello and welcome to a critical Let's Play of Super Mario 64. This is the first game I ever owned, and obviously it's a massively influential and important work in the canon of great video games. Now, I'm not the most skilled Mario 64 player in the world, but I've played through it more than my fair share of times over the years, and as I've done so, my thoughts and opinions about the game's overarching design have grown and evolved. So I'm taking the time to make this series to kind of document the big overarching design decisions that this game features, what those decisions both imply and entail, and what I think the game's overall legacy is. I'm not looking to tear down a beloved classic, but I am going to be looking at it with a critical eye in the hopes that my analysis can contribute to a deeper understanding of the game. So with all that said, let's start the game right off from the top. Now already here we have an interesting little piece of design. The title screen doesn't ask you to press start to play. Instead we're given a big cartoony 3D Mario head and the press start text down here at the bottom left. Now what's the point of all this? Well, you have to remember, the Nintendo 64 was a new console, 3D games were cutting-edge technology, and Nintendo has a strong sense of itself as a maker of toys. So obviously Mario's bouncy animated Looney Tunes-esque face is meant to impress and wow the player, but it also doubles as a very useful pre-game tool if the player engages with it. Now if you hit the A button here, like I just did, a little gloved cursor pops up, and we can move it around the screen along a two-dimensional XY axis. But as we do that, if we hit the A button again as our primary button of interaction, we can grab and stretch parts of Mario's face. Now, like I said, Nintendo thinks of itself as a toy maker. It thinks of the video games it makes as a kind of toy. So what I think we have here is a pre-main game tutorial that is designed and structured as a kind of digital toy. Obviously, we're playing. We're grabbing Mario's nose and his mustache and his down here we can grab his lip. We can do all these kinds of things. We can grab his hat. We can grab his ears. We can do all these sorts of things. Now, obviously, we're playing. This is funny. This is silly. This is goofy. It's play. It's play in a very pure sense. It's very childlike play, which really feeds back into the idea that Nintendo thinks of itself as a toy maker. So it would make sense they would design this as, I want to say, a way for younger children who, might not necessarily be skilled enough to play the full video game, but they have something to do. Now, like I was saying, this is not just a toy from the player's perspective. This, I think, is also a very, very interesting and useful tool that the designers put in as a way of teaching the player how to hold the controller. Now, again, 1996. The middle of the 90s was a very traumatic time for the video game industry in the sense that many of the companies that made two-dimensional games did not weather the transition to making three-dimensional games, 3D polygonal games very well. However, with Mario 64, I really think Nintendo was set on hitting it out of the park. So the controller for the Nintendo 64 is a strange looking thing. There was no really set standard at the time for what does a controller that can play 3D polygonal games, what is that supposed to look like? How many analog sticks does it have? How many buttons does it have? How would you hold it? With two hands? With one hand? What exactly would you do there? So Nintendo puts out this strange three-pronged controller. If you want to pull up a picture of the Nintendo 64 controller right now to have a reference point so you can see where all the buttons are related to each other while I talk about them, I would suggest that. But as we move the control stick around, you can do it with your index finger. If you were to put the controller down on the table and just move the control stick around with your index finger, you could do that, but you don't get a really good grip on it. It feels so much more natural and makes so much more sense to do so with your thumb, and the way that you do that is by bracing your thumb against the control stick with the rest of your hand steadying the motion of your thumb by holding the central prong of the controller. Now, the fact that the cursor we're moving around only moves in an X, Y, cardinal set of axes, I think is really important. Is an important piece of simplification to make this possible, to make it possible to really explore for yourself physically how do you hold the controller and at the very least move the control stick around. Now, once you've done that, it's not that hard to understand that you're supposed to hold one of the other prongs on the controller with your other hand and use your thumb to press the buttons there. All of the main 6 buttons are oriented around the right prong, so you can, as you look down, you can see that, and press the A button and grab different pieces of Mario's head and stretch them around to your heart's content. Now, the B button and the 4 C buttons here, like I've been saying, you can only move the cursor in an XY axis. But these other 5 buttons on the main face buttons on the controller are so effective at further explaining how 3D space works and how you can manipulate the perspective of an object in 3D space, that the act of interacting with Mario's head as a digital toy here is very instructive. Now, the most complex part, I believe, of the tutorial, of this sort of unspoken tutorial of how to hold the controller, is in that you can grab and move things, but they spring back. Well, what if you wanted that to stay? Well, as you're holding the right prong with your right hand, if you hold down the right shoulder button with your index finger, that's a very natural feeling motion. Now, nothing exactly indicates that you can do that. There's no text telling you that you can do that, but you can. And so it really stretches your hand out in terms of the complex muscle memory. Now, would a small child who was just playing around with this to play around and stretch Mario's face around be able to do this? I don't necessarily think so. But it's there. And I think the fact that you can discover how to do that, the fact that the motion to hold that button with your right index finger is very, very natural, is indicative of the fact that one of the core play aesthetics, the aesthetics of play, which is a concept I'll talk about a little bit later, of Mario 64 is discovery. The idea of discovering different, exciting things that you weren't told about, that you sort of explore and find on your own. So the fact that the 4 C buttons manipulate the perspective of Mario's head is a really interesting preview of how the main game works. But we've talked a lot so far about playing with this digital toy of Mario's head and how it kind of gives you an opportunity, a low-pressure opportunity to immediately start playing around with something. This puts the act of playing at the forefront of Mario 64's experience, I think. And it's especially powerful because if the first 5 minutes of any game are some of the most critical in terms of engaging the player. So the fact that they put this up here in front, you don't even need to hit the start button to get to this, is really something. It's really, really thoughtful and really, really intelligent and oriented towards making sure that the player doesn't get bored, that the player is interested, has something interesting to look at, and something interesting to do. But finally, we're going to press start, and we're going to close out this episode by saying next time we're going to talk just a little bit about an interesting thing about the way this menu screen is designed, and then talk about the game's main tutorial space proper.